This is an open letter on race. Hi, I'm Kai D. Wright, a lecturer at Columbia University, a media executive, and an author. Over the past week, I've had many conversations about race. For me, that's nothing new. For many others, it was difficult, embarrassing, enlightening, humbling, and painful. For all parties, these conversations have been a deep reflection that in these two Americas, many leaders have awoken to confront the fact that they've either been woefully ignorant or asleep at the wheel. Now that all our journeys have converged, many leaders and people want to know what to do. I applaud those moved to action. Welcome to the fight for the survival of Black Americans and the fight for the soul of American culture. We're exhausted. So we're happy to have new and growing allies. As Nina Simone said, to be young, gifted, and Black, oh, what a lovely, precious dream. And I've been afforded the time and space to dream big. And when no one willingly gave me that time and space, I learned to advocate for myself, tapped into my invaluable community, got thick, conjured my inner Black boy joy, and turned a no into a wow, he did that. Many Black people aren't so lucky to have that time and space or take the calculated career risk I've undertaken in pursuit of my dreams. So I understand my obligation to speak up and lead action. I'm simply lucky. There are millions of Black Americans that will never be given the opportunities that I had, yet could do what I do if they did have those opportunities. And that creates a heavy burden of duty. Across my many jobs of teaching at an Ivy League school, serving as an executive in media, and continually speaking and writing as an author, I've encountered racism at every turn and microaggressions every day. Shocker. With most Black people learning what racism is from childhood, I feel like an expert in spotting when it's both active and passive and small and large, and have a trove of stories. This piece, though, is not about any of those personal battle scars or shrapnel wounds. Rather, this piece is about what I am doing with those troubling, inhumane experiences and how they've shaped my point of view on Dr. Martin Luther King's critical question: where do we go from here? I've persevered, sometimes had breakdowns, and was always uplifted by a Black community that knew I was their dream. Someone who's a role model, advances strong values, pulls others up, claps back, and eloquently captivates an audience to action. Despite my relative success, I'm currently faced with a personal and professional reckoning, one that many Black Americans find themselves in at this critical inflection point. Did we do enough? What move to make next? What role to play as a change agent? Which problem to solve first? What is and is not acceptable any longer? My reckoning had three takeaways. I've done a lot, but can do better and more, and must. Specifically, this week taught me three things about my mindset and unintended enabling behavior. One, I shouldn't have simplified Black history to make it easy to digest for allies. Two, I shouldn't have let leaders and organizations go unchallenged. And three, I shouldn't have accepted being overlooked or underinvested in as Black talent. Let me explain how each of those three things have had unintended consequences and how I will be operating differently moving forward to evolve as a diversity champion in the classroom, in the boardroom. And humbly, I'd like to offer some advice to my fellow Black Americans and white allies. One, educating others about Black History 101. Whether the general population in America admits it or not, your history is Black history because Black history is American history. So I'm no longer keeping or giving a ready-made reading list full of documentaries, movies, books, podcasts, plays, or poems about Black history and culture. Why should I do your homework? Moving forward, I'm going to give one book or movie at a time and tell people to talk to me again after they've read it or watched it. I have to learn that even as an educator, I need to stop doing the homework of my allies. They're fully capable adults that I need to treat accordingly and hold responsible. Black folks, please stop summarizing our history, American history, in the cliff notes and bite-sized chunks to make easy to understand for the general population, your boss, neighbor, friend, colleague, Dr. Mailman, and beyond. Allies are more harmed when you remove the ugly side of history or skip details. Summarizing isn't helping anyone nor motivating any action. I learned American history, British history, European history, and world history all before leaving K through 12. I have every expectation that people around me will take time to learn about the ugly parts of American history that textbooks now call migration rather than slavery. If you want to be an ally, don't burden your Black colleagues, friends, and peers with the work you need to do. We don't enjoy educating you on race. As an ally, recognize that even when you innocently intend to foster conversation, the subject matter can re-traumatize and re-victimize Black people because the history of Black Americans is violent, raw, and disgusting. But it is your history too. A history created by the now general population who is conveniently now wanting to forget about it so they can abdicate needing to correct it. My freedom to dream is bought and paid for with the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestors. I will never forget my history. And you, allies, aren't off the hook either. Stop denying it by ignoring it. When you ignore it, Black Americans suffer longer. We learned everyone else's history in an often biased school curriculum, and then had to go home to study our own. We put in the work. I already put in the work. We don't need to be anybody's coach, sensei, or teacher on race. We did it, you can do it. And well past slavery, many Black people couldn't even read, but still learned their history and passed it on. I'm proud to be an educator, knowing that my own family members, based on research of looking at census reports from the 1800s to 1900s, couldn't even read or write. But still, I'm not doing your homework any longer. So start with one documentary or book, then discuss it with someone Black. That's an action you can start today. We will respect you far more when you have an informed point of view based on the time you spent learning than if you half-heartedly ask for a resource that you never proved to us you ever took the time to watch or read. We have to stop spoon feeding allies. And allies, you have to stop expecting to be spoon fed about race. As an educator, I'm reminded by the words of Aristotle, those that know do, those that understand teach. I like to see more non-Black people who know enough they can teach other people. Take that heavy burden off us. Call out the hate, jokes, offensive language happening in your circles on a daily basis. Seek understanding, and I will respect you for life. Ask me for a movie or a book recommendation, and my response will be a hard pass. As an ally, your goal should be to move from knowledge gathering to understanding. And when you understand enough to explain things to someone else, then you've read and watched enough. Number 2, giving a seat at the table for representation. As a country, we have gotten very comfortable with diversity and inclusion. We're comfortable with making changes to be inclusive, of non-controversial groups like veterans and parents. Companies then moved to LGBTQ, Happy Pride Month, and a brave few have advanced to gender. However, we haven't yet become comfortable enough to fully address the defining diversity principle of America since 1619, Black versus white, race. Under the law, gender and race have the same equal protection, yet companies actively prioritize gender and other non-Black groups with diversity and inclusion efforts. Diversity and inclusion leaders, please stop making us, Black employees, feel second class like we already do in America. When will you bet on Black? In 2018, Bloomberg, the international finance and media company that has nearly 20,000 employees, implemented a policy for diversity and inclusion in their newsroom. Journalists could only participate in conferences that have an onstage representation of women, at least one per panel. But why not include Black people or people of color if you're bold enough to rally for one group at a time? Seeing policies like these that choose one group over long-waiting Black Americans rings clear that it is fully within a company's power to enforce diversity standards, as in the case of Bloomberg, yet companies actively decide not to champion efforts for Black employees externally and internally. Companies committing to new policies represent one part of the solution. Let's go back to the conferences and events policy and why such a thing is so watershed. From experience, most big deals and recruiting for top jobs happen during conferences and events. Conferences are backdrops for vital exposure needed for career advancement and become places that set the tone for how industries will operate in the future. Often, conference organizers aren't held accountable for programming panels and keynotes full of white-dominated or white-only speakers, as if they're the only ones who can possibly shape thought leadership in business. And agencies and companies are not held accountable for enabling those conferences and events because they continue to participate, rather than demanding change that benefits everyone. And sometimes the companies are guilty themselves of not even allowing Black employees and executives to go to their own controlled conferences and events, which all harms the long-term ability of Black talent to gain exposure and credibility needed to rise up in an organization. I need my own company, WPP, to do better, to advocate, and to externally prop up Black voices. And Ogilvy can step its game up too. My message to them is the same message I have to every leader of a Fortune 500 company. Force change or sit it out on principle. You decide when enough is enough. Inaction and silence is an agreement with these broken policies and empty promises of inclusion, which we know ultimately harms my Black community economically in the long term. To my fellow Black executives and those coming after us, the road is long and winding and full of dead-end signs. As someone who teaches at Ivy League school, serves as one of the most senior client-facing Black executives in the US at the world's most known agency, an author with a major publisher, and someone who has done a dozen speaking engagements from South by Southwest, which, by the way, was the largest brand and marketing session among 120 sessions with over 1,200 attendees, to industry events for the Association of National Advertisers, the American Marketing Association, PR Society of America, and I am still often the only person of color speaking and attending major industry events. It's lonely. Or worse yet, I still face a mountain of rejection from event organizers that say my accomplishments are not enough. If all my degrees, professional experience, a decade of teaching experience, accolades, and thought leadership for writing an award-winning business book isn't enough to warrant speaking to audiences, then there's a flaw in conferences and or events from Cannes to CES that say they don't want diversity to be secondary, but continually fail to deliver. And everyone who attends, speaks, and approves expenses for conferences and events, you can do more to champion diverse voices as a policy in your company. To get to my point, I'm starting a pledge for more conferences and events to be held accountable for the glaring lack of people of color in programming. We must amplify the voices of individuals and not settle for an unsubstantiated and empty diversity statement and then zero or a token inclusion. In an age of LinkedIn, it is impossible to believe someone who says they cannot find someone Black. BS. If you run an agency, company, or organization, then this is your fight. Be our ally, get us on stage virtually or physically so we can get the credit we deserve for steering culture and opportunities to provide different points of view that represent communities you and your clients profit from. Try harder. Change happens when the voices controlling the narrative shifts. Uplift and advance someone else. Third, last but not least, finding, nurturing, and advancing Black talent. Companies recognize that there's systemic racism, yet obfuscate and skirt around, amending their recruitment, development, and retention strategies. We see time and time again that white male ineffective leaders often get golden parachutes while Black employees, both executives and lower level individuals, remain behind and are overlooked, held back, underpaid, and eventually pushed out. In the age of Me Too, the New York Times tracked 201 white men pushed out of their jobs, and the majority were replaced by other white people. Over 50% were white women. In terms of getting Black employees over the finish line of senior management, we have to critically ask ourselves not the why that prevents it, because we know the why is systemic racism and individual biases, but the how to overcome it, what the company culture creates, and why it creates a void of Black executives. Sometimes Black people don't last or aren't hired under the moniker of lack of culture fit. Whose culture? American culture, human culture, no, white culture. To say someone is not a culture fit is to other and ostracize them. It means you can't be bothered to account for another human's experience that doesn't fit the current homogeneous thinking of an organization. Black people have a uniquely blended culture of our own. We are assets to companies that require empathy to sell products to diverse communities. I'm tired of white creative directors acting like they know multicultural audiences. Respectfully, stay in your lane and empower Black people to speak for themselves and their community. Your demographic data dump and one sheet persona snapshot doesn't begin to capture the nuances and rich tapestry of my community. To be blunt, we Black Americans will never assimilate to your mainstream gen pop white culture. Stop waiting, punishing, and barring us from owning our own culture within corporate America. We want this high stakes standoff for assimilation to end. Inherently, I work in audience-driven fields, communication, marketing, and advertising. All industries built on human behavior and empathy. Companies mirror the values of their leaders. So if your company doesn't have senior Black executives or board members, then the culture of your company is one of complacency and denial, period. There are hundreds of highly qualified Black thought leaders and business executives fully capable of and already leading teams, clients, and organizations. We are not hiding in plain sight. You are actively overlooking us. Moving forward, I'm challenging companies to invest more in the Black community, starting with their Black employee development. Now that leaders have eyes wide open that the struggle is real, and those Black employees continue to show up every day, shouldn't be taken for granted. If your company can have 1 million programs for women or other minority groups or diverse groups, then you can have one well-funded management training program for Black people. We need systemic change to how, why, and when specific groups are prioritized. But most importantly, just start the programs and iterate rather than miring them down in red tape. We need them now more than ever. And to those employees who ask why Black Americans should be addressed first, it's because we've been waiting over 400 years for acknowledgement and recompense. The only way to cure racism and heal the divide of two Americas is to right the initial injustice in the Black community of underinvestment and undercommitment in resources that will continue to shackle America from full prosperity. As an organization or leader, show that you value your Black employees through actions that benefit them tangibly. Commit to action by a near date. Your chief diversity officer and our white allies have hundreds of ideas. Most organizations are late already, so we ask that you also not be slow. Save your corporate Black Lives Matter social post or lengthy diversity statement. We'll rather see you proudly post a picture of your executive team and board of directors for the internet to react. We will then quickly see that we can do better in corporate America. Overall, as a Black educator, business person, and leader, I need to do better. It is my duty, and I owe that to my community. My privilege of being able to move freely between the classroom and the boardroom means I have no choice but to speak and act and continue teaching the next generation of leaders what Black excellence looks like personified and the value of Black people in the world. And in doing so, I can only hope that I so eloquently articulated what so many Black people around you have likely been trying to say for years, since Trayvon Martin, since Sandra Bland, since Ahmaud Arbery, since Breonna Taylor, since Botham James, since Eric Gardner, since George Floyd. Learn their names. They're now part of American history, Black history, your history. We need to do better together. And that starts with accountability. I want everyone in my community to hold me accountable for my pledge actions because I'll be holding others accountable. Sorry, but this isn't a message of hope. It's a message to stay woke because education, representation, and talent development are all critical components to building a healthy work environment and community for all. We cannot allow leaders to stay asleep at the wheel any longer. In my point of view, if this made you uncomfortable, then good. That means it's resonating. Your discomfort means you're thinking critically and already mentally challenging your own status quo biases. You're not alone in feeling that discomfort. Turn that discomfort into empowerment through meaningful action. Learn about Black history at whatever pace you want. Have deep and meaningful conversations about what you learned with others. Put someone else on that stage for attention externally and develop Black talent. Whatever action you decide to take, first, start today. Welcome to the fight. Let's get to work. I'm Kai.